Happy almost Easter, everybody. Yesterday was Good Friday, and tomorrow, Easter morning. So, I wanted to take this morning, kind of like I did during the week leading up to Christmas, and just take a time to talk about what's going on the World Wide Web and on the internet. And yeah, and kind of dispel some of the wackiness that is out there. Hey, I want to encourage you guys. Let me know when you get in, say hi, and hopefully we'll get some people to take a listen to this because again, it's kind of a big deal that we know what we believe and why we believe it. And I think in this day and age, there's something about us that we don't like being deceived. That's pretty normal, I think. But sometimes in a rebellion, in a reaction, a rebound to this desire not to be deceived, sometimes I think we go out and we like assume that we've been deceived and then we got to question everything and be all worried about stuff. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Easter today, my one day Easter thing. And let me read, of course, to you out of Alexander Hislop's The Two Babylons. Look at Easter. What means the term Easter itself? It is not a Christian name. It bears the Chaldean origin on its very forehead. Easter is nothing other than Ashtart, or, whatnot. So, or Ishtar, as it mentions later. And so, if you were with us as we were studying First Chronicles at our church, I actually brought this book with me to church and started talking about it a little bit. This book came out, it's quite old, a couple hundred years old, and it started off as a pamphlet, and the pamphlet grew, and it got really popular. We were talking about Nimrod as we were doing our First Chronicles study, and what I mentioned is it's fascinating that when you start hearing about Nimrod being married to Semiramis, and all these other interesting things about Nimrod and the pagan origins. This book is the oldest source you can find that in. The whole Nimrod and Semiramis. Now, go on YouTube and you'll find a ton of teachers teaching this. This is fact that Nimrod, he started the pagan worship, married to Semiramis, and it's in this book. This book's this book's like just over 100 years old, or right around 100 years old. It's where do we get it from further back? And so let me actually read to you. Let's see here. Something you find on Facebook. This is a post on Facebook that's been circulated numerous times. Easter was originally the celebration of Ishtar, the Assyrian and Babylonian goddess of fertility and sex. Her symbols, like the egg and bunny, were and still are fertility and sex symbols. After Constantine decided to Christianize the empire, Easter was changed to represent Jesus, but all its roots, Easter, which is how you pronounce Ishtar, is all about celebrating fertility and sex. So first off, Easter, right? We're all, I think most of us are Americans. I know we get some non-American watchers. If you're not from America, you should say hi. But, America is one of the only places in the world, or I should say the English-speaking countries, who say Easter. It's actually Germanic in origin, but if you're Dutch, it's Pasen, French, Paquez, Spanish, Pascua, I think, Welsh, Pasc, Greek, Pascha, all Papa. Well, see, everywhere else, it's still tied to the original Hebrew name of Pascha, of the Paschal lamb of Passover. The name of the celebration was always, hey guys, I got visited. My children running in here. They're making breakfast. I think they're not used to 8 o'clock. They're usually thinking Dad's done by now. Well, that was fun. So everywhere else, it's still tied to that original name. So here's the catch: is that you don't see it until about the 16th century, 15th, 16th century, around Luther's time, right? in Germany, where we start seeing the Easter name, Oestar, coming from up that area. And so really Germanic and English, because a lot of what we have comes through the Reformation, right? And so a lot of the English stuff's based off German stuff. A lot of our Christmas stuff is based off of German tradition because the Reformation and the influence that had on Christianity. But the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus, well, that's been going on since, I don't know, the year after the resurrection of Jesus. And so the celebration's been going on and on and on for a long time. And only recently did it get the name Easter. I mean, comparatively recent. So here's just a funny thought. What we have here is a fallacy called the association fallacy, where when you think one thing sounds like another thing, that must mean that they're related. Well, because of the Roman Catholic Church and Christianity as a whole, by about 1000 AD, paganism was pretty much eradicated from all of Europe. Okay? And so paganism was wiped out. I mean, it was. The church had the Roman Catholic Church, everything. There was no Druid worship. I mean, if it was so underground, it was gone. And so then after 400 or 500 years later, did someone just say, we should rename this celebration after a Babylonian goddess? It's kind of foolish, actually, to think that. Yeah, Easter and Ishtar sound the same, but that's just not how it works. For what it's worth, too, if you can find, maybe, Google can find quite a bit, any pictures of archaeology that ever depicts Ishtar or Astarte or whatever, different names, same girl, with a bunny or with an egg, I will applaud you and I will buy you a lunch at your restaurant of choice because they don't exist. She never was associated with rabbits or eggs. The animal she was associated with was the lion, and the symbol was like a 12 or 16 pointed star, and they were symbols of power. So yeah, there was fertility stuff involved too, but bunnies and eggs had nothing to do with her. So again, it's just kind of these weird things that we see it on Facebook, we see it on YouTube, and all of a sudden we must think it must be true. Because I mean, obviously eggs and bunnies have to be about sex, and so therefore it must be a fertility goddess, obviously. So backing things up a little bit here. So we do have this word Easter. Where did Easter come from? And so there's all these variations of the word, and I'm not going to give you all of them, but basically it comes from the words Easter month. There's the Easter month celebration. So there was a month in Germany in Old High German. So we're talking about ancient German, not modern German. Old High German, the month of April was called Easter month. So what's Easter mean then? Well, Oasterum, Old High German, it means spring. Now, here's the idea is more than likely that month, because by that point, and I could get in if you want to get into all the early church liturgy and how Easter and the resurrection and the Passover and Good Friday and all these things, they became over week-long celebrations. We call it Holy Week, but they even went longer. They would go past. They used to celebrate because Jesus showed up to the apostles, then 8 days later he shows up again. They would celebrate those 8 days. And so it became a huge celebration in the early church that went on for days and days and days. And so Easter month probably just got shortened to Easter, which was a trickling down of the old High German word for springtime. So the spring celebration or spring month celebrations just started being called spring. And eventually that word transformed to really just mean Easter Day and no longer the month in general. Now again, well, that's tied into a pagan deity. Oaster, that was a goddess, the spring goddess. Here's what I found as you do a little bit of research. In fact, you can find this on Encyclopedia Britannica. This is not like deep knowledge. This is like Encyclopedia Britannica. One view, expounded by the Venerable Bede in the 8th century, was that it derived from Oaster or Oastre, the Anglo-Saxon goddess of spring and fertility, though this appears a rather dubious presumption. So encyclopedia thinks it's a rather dubious presumption. Why? Turns out, Oastre, you might hear. Well, Easter doesn't come from Ishtar. It comes from a German goddess. And I thought this for a while too, because there was a German goddess named Oastre. Well, now what scholars are finding out is that this guy Bede in the 8th century, so we're talking about 700 AD, he's the only person in ancient history to reference this goddess. There's just one reference to her in one writing. Nowhere else is there actually any historical evidence that this goddess ever existed. And scholars today are now questioning if this guy either had a bone to pick or there was some confusion, because it's odd that a springtime fertility goddess has only one historical reference. And yet the same word can also be tied into just simply mean springtime. So people are thinking, it's sounding more likely it's not from a goddess, it's just from the word springtime. So that's where we get the word from, Easter. And we celebrate it on Resurrection Sunday. It's worth noting that there were divisions in the early church about how to celebrate this. I'm not even going to say the word. I'm going to butcher it if I tried. It's the, I said it. You just didn't pay enough attention if you didn't understand. But there was the Easter arguments, or the Paschal arguments. And what you find about those is that two groups did arrive in the early church. One group said we should always celebrate the crucifixion on Passover, the 14th of Nisan, the Jewish Passover. We celebrate the crucifixion on that day, and we will celebrate the resurrection 2 days later. On the third day, 2 days later. This is what the early church was doing. Another group said, no. We're just going to celebrate the resurrection on the first day of the week after Passover every year. So whatever day Passover is, that, whether it's a Monday, a Wednesday, a Thursday, we're going to celebrate Easter on Sunday, and we will celebrate the crucifixion 2 days earlier. When you have lunar calendars, and a lot of this actually came from the fact that there was confusion, because when the Jews were dispersed from the diaspora of 70 AD after Jerusalem was destroyed, even the Jews were having a hard time selecting Passover dates, because Passover is determined by the visibility of the full moon in Jerusalem. And when they were all together in one place, they would add months, and it's not on a set rotation. They have a leap month in their calendar. And so when they were dispersed all over the world, they had a hard time getting together and deciding what month we add this leap month. And so they were getting confused on when to have the Passover. So the early church was trying to figure it out, because they used to just go off of what the Jews were doing. But then it's like, well, we can't do that anymore. So that's where this division came. Well, we should determine Passover. No, we should have it on Sunday. So that existed. I want to give one last thing, because I think it was just fascinating doing some reading about the Easter bunny and Easter eggs. And maybe, just maybe, it's not a horrific, evil, pagan thing for you to do with your family. So if you go back historically trying to learn about the Easter bunny, what we find in Germanic culture was actually an Easter hare. The earliest references are always to a hare, not to a bunny. Rabbits and hares are actually very different animals. Hares are bigger. They have big, taller ears. Rabbits are communal, colony little animals. They all live together. Hares are actually isolation. You rarely ever see two hares together unless by chance you stumble on them mating. Otherwise, they live alone. It is because the hare is such an isolated animal and doesn't ever hang out with its brother and sister or whatever, right? Plutarch, Pliny the Elder, actually some of the ancient philosophers and scholars, they actually assumed it was a hermaphrodite, that it could reproduce in and of itself, not needing a mate. And it was actually because of this that it served as a type actually in the early Church of the Virgin Mary. So that's just a fascinating thing. You can find those references to those ancient scholars and just these thoughts. It never got brought into the church as a big thing, but it was used and referred to as a type. Take us now to 15th century Germany. Well, it is during this time that a few things were going on, but one of which was we start seeing references to the hare being brought into Easter celebrations. Well, have you ever heard this saying as mad as a March hare? We should know Alice in Wonderland, right? There's the Mad Hatter and the March Hare. Come around March is mating season for hares. And I guess traditionally, they act very odd during mating season, trying to attract mates, doing it, and they just act goofy, I guess. They'll jump up in the air by themselves with no one else around, and they just do strange things. Well, once again, too, this was a spring festival. They're celebrating that the plants are coming. Isn't it great to see before the snow hit all those daffodils last weekend? It's a wonderful time of the year to see the flowers back and the animals are starting to show back up again. And so a couple things take place. They're celebrating spring. Just again, you have to imagine living that long ago. It wasn't like today. You were much more thankful when the warm weather came out, when you didn't have central air and you didn't have sealed windows. I mean, people were happy for spring. Well, the hares show up, and then there's these eggs. Well, the early church did, but even the medieval church especially, they practiced Lent, and they didn't eat meat during Lent, and they would save their eggs, because normally you can eat eggs for so much time, but they would stockpile eggs, because they can't eat them, but they can save them, right? So they're not butchering any animals, but they got these eggs, they come on their own. So they're saving and stockpiling eggs until on Easter when they're allowed to eat meat again. And how do you mass cook and mass hand out eggs? Is you boil them all. And so they would boil tons of their eggs and they would be able to give them out and distribute them. And for what it's worth, if you do I love homeschooling. I'm learning so much more now than I did when I was actually in school. But meat was not a common thing for the common poor people. Peasants did not get that much meat. It was a rare, special thing to get meat. And eggs was one of the few things they could have. And when they couldn't have it during Lent, they were happy to get the eggs back. Turns out they were able to actually boil eggs with the spring flowers, and the eggs would take on the colors of the flowers. And so they could actually boil eggs and have them be pretty colors, and they would decorate and celebrate. And the eating of eggs became a thing because they were finally able to eat that meat again. And yes, this is again a hypothesis, which I've heard some people throw out. Sounds good to me, but I'll be honest, I haven't found any good direct primary sources on it. But it's a celebration with the eggs. They would do skits. I mean, for Easter, there would be skits, there'd be celebrations, there'd be songs and games and crafts. And so the idea of decorating eggs came in as a possible thing. That's actually recorded, but what's not recorded is the idea of then hiding the eggs and putting them out for the kids to go find. Now, who hid the eggs? Well, maybe it's that crazy March hare who's out there being all silly and weird off in the fields. He went and took the eggs and hid them in the fields. And they actually do have it's 1572 is one of our earliest recorded Easter bunny references. And it talks about the hare hiding the eggs and talk about catching him and boiling the whole nest, going and finding the eggs from the hare that he stole and moved. So it's not that the bunny was creating eggs. He was the one hiding the eggs. So all that said, it's interesting to find that most of these things have very sincere, humble, joyful origins. And have we lost all those roots of our history? Oh, definitely we have. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's pagan. And it doesn't mean it's wrong. In fact, there's nothing wrong with traditions. We all do traditions. In fact, that's what we base most of our stuff off of is traditions. Oh, hello, Hannah Grace.
Daddy, Jubilee's not cooking oatmeal right there.
Jubilee's not cooking your oatmeal? Okay. We got to get Jubilee to start cooking some oatmeal. But I'll throw this out here too. Again, but maybe Easter was named after a pagan goddess, or named after the month of which the month was named after. Again,
you know what Easter?
Let me finish my thing. You know what Easter is? Oh, that's good. But we celebrate 4th of July. And did you know that July is named after Julius Caesar? So is 4th of July a pagan holiday because you're celebrating an event named after a Roman? Are you a Roman worshiper? Anyway, it's this kind of association fallacy that gets us into trouble. Anytime something sounds like something, anytime something may be associated to something, well, then it must be evil. And that's just not the case. So there you go, church. A little bit about Easter, a little bit about the Easter bunny, which again, I think the hare just turned into a bunny over time because the average person couldn't tell the difference between a bunny and a hare. And there you go, though. We're done. Do you want to go find Easter eggs tomorrow? Do you like eggs? You like candy. Do you like candy? Yeah. Can you find candy anywhere? We could hide candy on the moon, and Hannah would be able to find it, wouldn't you? Okay. You guys take care. Have a wonderful Easter. Bundle up if you're going to a sunrise service, but it's worth it. So I'll see you guys around.